Today we are interviewing Mr. E.S. Palmer of Henryetta, Oklahoma, on March 28, 1972. This interview is for the Oklahoma Living Legends and the Oklahoma Christian College. Your interviewer is James Katigan. Mr. Palmer, bring us up on some of your background and how you arrived in Indian Territory, your birth, and about some of your people, your mother and father, and bring us on up to just as much as you can think of Mr. Palmer, right up to the present.
My father was originally from Illinois, and my mother was originally from Pennsylvania. They met in Arkansas and were married, and immigrated to Salisaw, Indian Territory, in the 1900s. 1890, I think it was, somewhere in there. But I was born in 1899 in the Indian Territory. My schooling was at Salisaw. I went to school before statehood there. Had to sign as Indian Territory. My education was up to the 8th grade. I have in my possession a state examination that was issued to me in diploma. It was a state diploma issued to me in 1915, June 2nd, 1915, signed by R.H. Wilson, State Superintendent of Public Institutions. Give you an idea of the difference in our school systems is that then and now is that this diploma entitled me to be able to teach in the grade schools. Now, as to what I did in my early days, of course, we had a lot of things that we could do then that they don't do anymore. Horseback riding, for instance, and many other things that the kids did for their own entertainment. One of mine was rope spinning. I like to spin a rope, and I got rather good at it. And I went up to town and as a boy and on Saturdays and spinning the rope, and on Saturdays almost all surrounding people came to town. That was the day that the farmers usually come in with their cotton and sold it. And one day spinning these ropes, as the people would throw pennies and nickels out to us, the boys, a couple of us that usually did it, and our audience left. And we began to try to find out what it was, and it turned out that there was 3 robbers out the edge of town robbing the farmers that had left out. They got a group of men, and they went out to catch them, and they wounded one of them and caught the other one, and one of them got away by the name of Ed Hines. This Ed Hines, I never heard of him until 1936. I took my family on a vacation to Comish Mountains on the Comish River. We're out from Albany about 2 miles, I suppose, and at the mouth of Walnut Creek. And took them out there, and then my wife and I went back up to Albany to buy groceries for there, and the groceryman there told us that if we didn't have license, we better get them, because if we didn't, Ed Hines would be down to find out if we had license, and he'd arrest anybody for any little slight provocation. Well, I did meet Ed Hines down there. He did come down, but I beat him to it. Showed him my license before he ever asked for them. And I met this man quite often as I'd go into that country from then on. And he was a very cordial man and went out of his way. I have a map drew of that country and of all his personal hot fishing spots. He went out of his way in every way he could to be of service to me, and every time I met him down there. But I found out by one of the natives down there that this man was the same man that was causing all the trouble at Sallisaw when I was a boy, the Ed Hines that was out there. And he had been a deputy sheriff, and then they wanted him as a ranger because the poachers were getting the deer, and they didn't have anybody that they thought was hard enough to get them, and so they employed him. And he actually was in Henryetta here for 2 years, I believe, as a ranger, and made an excellent man. One reason that I brought this up is that for back in the early days, in Indian Territory days, the outlaws from Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas and other places were chased into the Indian Territory because the sheriffs could not come over in the territory and get them, and took a United States Marshal. And there was very little questions asked of a man when he came into town. If he was, they just waited a little while to see what developed. And if he was turned out to be a good citizen, why, his past was forgotten. They didn't do very much about it. Now, I came to Henryetta in 1915, and when I came to Henryetta, it was entirely a mining community. Very little farming was done. Also, there were some Negro families in the around about it, the town and the surrounding community that did do some farming, but most people either raised cattle or worked in the mines. The rest of us were either in stores of some sort or in transportation, the railroads, employed in this way. Myself, I became a tailor. I have been in the tailoring business since 1917. I started as an apprentice as a tailor in 1917. Worked 4 years as an apprentice. But when I came to Henryetta, there wasn't very much here in the way it is now, because the two railroads, one of them had not been here too long, and this community was fast growing, but the town was built up on a hill. The railroads were down below, and where the Frisco depot is now, there was a little depot and a freight depot and a little store and confectionery and restaurant joining to it. And then there was the Georgian Hotel not very far away. And then coming up the street going west, on the left-hand side for almost better than a block, there wasn't anything. And on the right-hand side, there was a livery stable, and up on the other corner from the livery stable, there was the Camel Hotel. And then we came on up the street while we run into a few stores, and then in the what is now the 400 block, that's the block where the Morgan building is. They call it the Morgan building because there was a man in Henryetta at one time that could have been anything. In my opinion, he was one of the best speakers that I believe I've ever heard. He had built this opera house, they call it. This building is a 3-story building, and it had an opera, what they call the opera house in the top story. He later on built in another block down below, most of the block, and it was Morgan Theater. And he got to drinking quite a little bit. Alcohol is his downfall. It cost him that in the stock market crash in 1929, cost him a fortune. But even after this, he promoted a full block of residents in our community. If he had have left the liquor alone, he could have been, I know, the governor of the state of Oklahoma. There's many of the old timers still living around that were here when I came. I think some of them are to be interviewed today. But I don't think that I could give you too much of a history on the prior to the time I was here. I can give you some hearsay, but I understand they only want what I know, not what I have heard.
Mr. Palmer, you mentioned something about the mining industry of Henryetta, and also was there not a smelter in operation here for quite a length of time?
Yes. Yes, the smelter was out at Eagle Pitcher smelter. There was actually when I first came here, there was the Eagle Pitcher, the Rich Hill smelter, and Coosey. Now, Coosey was a community on the other side of Dewar. It's about 5 miles from here. And Eagle Pitcher was out in the northeast part of the town, at the edge of the town out there. It was as you go out from here to Dewar, it's on the left-hand side. And Rich Hill, of course, the old highway went through it, Rich Hill, to go to Dewar. And this smelter was owned by the Esterly brothers, and some of the Esterly brothers are still living around here.
Mr. Palmer, on the mining industry here in Henryetta, what market did the producers of the coal here have? Was it used for commercial purposes like heating and or was it used mostly for railroad coal? And do you remember any incidents that might have happened during the mining days, and also the economy of this section of Henryetta and the surrounding Henryetta during the mining and smelting days?
Well, yes, the coal industry had a market. They had the railroads took practically all the coal that they could produce in this area, but they also had power plants and different things that they where coal was used. Of course, in today they have these dams around that produces the electricity instead of coal. There's a few places where that they still use coal yet, but we have no coal mines operating in our area right at this moment.
Mr. Palmer, while the mining industry was going at full swing here in Henryetta, would you say that the market was so great because natural gas was not the type of fuel being used in most places, and more or less at this time it was probably in a research and not much production. Let's see what you think about the difference in the market during this time.
Well, of course, most of in this area here, they had gas when I first came here, but a lot of the residents and also the business concerns of our community used the coal for heating purposes. Now, I don't know what the market would be now, because I don't.
Market probably, Mr. Palmer, has been taken up by gas and oil production. Mr. Palmer, getting back to the mining in Henryetta in the early days, would you care to tell us something about what you can remember mining in those days? Now, like, for instance, did they use carbide or electric lamps for the miners to use in the mine? And was the coal of a very large vein? And also, was the mining here in Henryetta done by slopes or shafts?
Well, they had, taking your last question, they had both the shafts and the slopes. And these mines were not lit up, except some of them had lights on the entries, but not electric lights right at the bottom of the place. But they didn't have them all out through the mine. They used carbide lights when I came to Henryetta, but I understand that in the early days they did have some coal oil lamps that they used. As to how the mining was done, it was the entry was a 6-foot entry, tall. The height of it was 6 foot, and it varied as they went down. And these entries were driven down the vein of coal, but they were paid for. The miner that was driving the entries, the miners that were driving this entry, were paid for the extra slate and stuff that they got out to make this entry high enough for the driver and the mule to pull the cars down to the room necks for the miners. The rooms themselves were not over 3 feet high, somewhere in that neighborhood. All the miners were on their knees to load the cars. They didn't have to pick the coal out of the vein. It was drilled and shot every evening after the work was over. That was the last thing they did. When they got their last car loaded, they would drill the corners and put a shot in there, and after the day's work was done, the man that called fire boss, he'd go down through there and light these fuses and have the face of the coal from the corners would cause it to spill out into the room. And the next day, the miner would have the coal to load into the carts or little cars that they had. Of course, there was a lot of incidents happening here. I think you asked about gas in the mine. There was some gas, but as far as I know, they never had any explosions in the mines around here. But they did have, at one time here, they had an accident. We had some high water in this area, and the creek got up, and since the mines were, some of these entries went under the creek and some of the room necks, one of them evidently caved in right in the bed of the creek, and it spilled through this hole into that particular mine. And it was not working at the time, but one that was not too far away was working, and it was a group of men that had gotten together and opened this mine up. They were the owners of it at the time. And this water from one of the mine that it caved in came through a room neck where it joined into this other mine and began to flood that mine. These people were working down there, and somebody discovered that what had happened and called the tipple of the mine out there to tell them about it, and one of the top men, the name of Hector McNeil, went down in the mine to warn the miners, and he got caught also down there. The ones that were down at the bottom of right at the shaft got out, but there was 7, I think, the number was, that was caught in this mine, and they had quite a time of it. McNeil knew this area very well, and he knew that the mine was not all level like most people think a mine would be. It went up and down just like the outside ground did. And he knew of a high spot, and he led these men through low water up to over the neck, and threw up into this high spot. And at this high spot they had drilled an air shaft, and they were contacted through this air shaft. And some of the other miners in this area knew had worked in both of these mines and other mines around about, so they figured it out how they could get to these men. They went down a mine way over from where the mine that had caved in was, and went down in it and went down through it to this other mine, and went through and to these men and led them back out through this other mine. They were all rescued.
Mr. Palmer, while here in Henryetta, in some of your early days, I understand you was quite a civic leader and helped organize the Boy Scouts in Henryetta and Sallisaw. Would you tell us something about your work in the Boy Scouts?
Well, my first acquaintance at all with the Boy Scouts was through the papers. Back in 1912, I was a member of a Sunday school class of boys in the Methodist Church at Sallisaw, and 3 or 4 of us got interested in Boy Scouts, and we began to try to find out how to organize. And we talked to our Sunday school teacher about being scoutmaster. Well, he agreed to be scoutmaster, but he said he didn't know anything about it. Well, we didn't either. So we wrote into the headquarters and got the information as what we had to do to organize. And we found out that we had to have 3 businessmen as committeemen to get a charter for Boy Scout troop. And it took us quite a while to overcome the idea that most people had at that time, that the Boy Scouts was part of the military service because of their uniform that they wore at that time. We finally got the committeemen, and the troop was organized in 1913. And our Sunday school teacher became the scoutmaster, Mr. Garvin Roach. But I had no hand in bringing scouting to Henryetta. Scouting was in Henryetta when I came here in 1915. But I did later on in the Methodist Church here, became active with the Boy Scouts as a committeeman, and I served as chairman of the committee for Troop 84 for at least 2 years, in 35 and 36. And this Troop 85 is still active in scouting here in Henryetta today.
Mr. Palmer, here in Henryetta, you were a member of the Cleaners and Dyers would you give us some of what the duties are of this organization and some of the highlights in the cleaning industry here in Henryetta during these early days?
Well, of course, the cleaning industry, when I first made the acquaintance of it, was gasoline. We used drip gasoline, or white gasoline, I think they call it today, but most of it was just natural gas that where they liquefied. That's what it was. It really had a big high flash point. And generally, most all the cleaners in Henryetta, when at the time there were 7 cleaners in Henryetta at one time. There's 4 in Henryetta at this particular time, but at that time there were 7, and these only one of the group that I knew of had any kind of machinery to use in cleaning. They had press machines by steam press machine, but none of them. Most of them had a big vat, and they'd put this closed gasoline in this vat, this open vat, and they'd take a brush and scrub it, and then since it is a high flash point and evaporated quick, they'd hang it on the line and let it deodorize. Of course, this didn't last too long because the state got rather strong on fire hazards, and the association, Cleaners and Dyers Association, the National Cleaners and Dyers Association, that is, which I was a member of for several years, about 30 of them, I think. They got a man to work on it, a chemist to work on it, and he come up with what was called Stoddard solvent, which is a low flash point stuff, materials or fluid, and this was used then. It cut down the hazards of fire greatly, and by this time they had began to use machines, what they call batch system. Then they'd clean a bunch of clothes and pull the solvent off and put some more in there and rinse the clothes out, and then extract them and run them through a tumbler for to deodorize them. A little later on, the man got the idea that like a cream separator, that these heavy substance could be gotten out of the solvents that were used, and they come out with the Valve company that was also a cream separator company. They took it up and made a machine that would actually do this, and that was called a continuous flow system. In other words, the solvent flowed through the cleaning machine all the time. It went in clean, it came out dirty, and this machine would clean it up and run back. After it run a certain length of time, of course, the machine would have all the foreign things taken out. It was rather awkward to use. You had to clean it quite often. And then they came up with another system, a filtering system, which is used today. This filter is on the same principle. It does exactly the same thing, except they have a filtering powder that is caught on screens, and the fluid is pumped through it by force, and the fatty acids and dirt and all foreign particles from the solvent is extracted from it in this manner. I also became a director of the Oklahoma Cleaners and Dyers, and this organization has kind of stabilized the industry. During the Depression, all the cleaners in Henryetta went broke except 2, and the 2 that didn't go broke were the ones that would not cut prices below where they could make enough profit to live on. But the Cleaners and Dyers Association got the cleaners together into a great portion of us into a group, and we have now a Cleaners and Dyers, State Cleaners and Dyers Board that regulates our prices by counties. If we want to raise in cleaning prices, we have to go through this board to do it. This board has turned down quite a few cleaning prices that we asked for. Other raises in our cleaning prices that we asked for, they have turned it down. So it kind of stabilized the business. We have 4 cleaners in Henryetta, and we have had 4 for quite a few numbers of years.
Mr. Palmer, we hear you are from a large family. Will you tell us something about your family?
Why, yes, my father was a contractor, and but the family grew faster than his income, I guess, because we had 9 children in the family and my grandmother living with us. And everybody that got old enough worked. I remember that my first job was as water boy on one of his construction jobs. And that was at the age of 12 years old. And if he didn't have a job that we could do, during cotton picking time, we picked cotton. During berry picking time, we picked berries. My grandmother worked right along with each one of us. And I'm the 4th of the family. I had an older sister, which is here in Henryetta at the time, as Effie Hargrave. Her husband was connected with the mine. That was one reason, that mining industry. That was one reason that I knew quite a little bit about mining industry. My younger sister was, she died in Henryetta in the 30s. Her name was Briscoe, Leela Briscoe. And she married Jim Briscoe, who was also a miner. And then I have a brother that is older than I was, that was a miner for some time here, but later on was with the Army Engineers. And he retired from the Army Engineers a few years ago, but he has also passed away. And then, of course, I'm the next in the family. And then I have another brother, younger than I am, A.D. Palmer, who's here in Henryetta. And I have a sister, Victoria Ledbetter, who's in California. And then I have a younger brother than she, who is here in Henryetta, Leon Palmer. He was connected with the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company here until his retirement. And then my youngest brother, Jimmy, was killed in an accident on the main street of Henryetta when he was 11 years old.
Palmer, going back and some of the information about your family now, you have a pretty good story there about your grandmother. Let's go over it.
Well, of course, my grandmother was in our family when I was born. I don't know just when she lost her husband, but I do know that as far back as I can remember, I had my grandmother Anderson live with us, and we all loved her. She worked with us as a family. And but she had a dream that I always thought it was a dream, and I think most of the family thought it was a dream. She had, her husband had been in the Civil War. He had been a soldier in the Civil War, and she always said that someday she's going to be rich, that she would get a pension from her husband, that they'd pay her this pension. And after I came to Henryetta in the 20s, I was working, and a man came in with a briefcase and began to ask me if I was E.S. Palmer. I told him, yes, I was E.S. Palmer. Well, he said, you got a grandmother named Sarah Anderson? I said, yes, sure have. And he began to ask me questions about Sarah Anderson and her early life. I told him that I couldn't tell him too much about her early life except what I had heard in conversations from my family. And he asked me what these were, and I gave him the information as the best of my knowledge. Then I got curious. I asked him, I said, well, now you've asked me a lot of questions. Let me ask you one. He said, okay. I said, well, what's this all about anyway? I said, well, he said, if you're correct in what you say here, these things are correct, and I can verify it, says your grandmother will get a pension. I said, she will, yeah. He said, I have here in this briefcase the enlistment papers of her husband in the Army. And he said, would you like to see it? Of course, I wanted to see this. And to my surprise, he couldn't even read and write. He had marked an X for his signature. And she did get the pension, and she did become rich in her estimation.
We have just had an interview with Mr. E.S. Palmer of Henryetta, Oklahoma, on this date, March 28, 1972. This interview is for the Oklahoma Living Legends of the Oklahoma Christian College. Your interviewer has been James Katigan.